Hi, everyone. Welcome to Turning Point. I'm your host, Blaine Birch, and I'm really excited today to have joining me Eduard Kankanyan, co-founder and creative director of Blaine, which is a branding agency. Eduard, you're based in Toronto, but I know you have some other offices internationally, so that's kind of an interesting area I'd like to dig into and how you sort of manage that. But welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. And actually, this is my first podcast in Canada. I just moved to Toronto probably two months ago, and everything here is very new to me. So we'll be glad to share my both experiences in Armenia and in Canada, and the differences that I see as a creative person, as a business person. And
yeah, I'm excited to hear some of that, and just your experience of moving to Toronto in the winter, which is kind of a tough time to start there. I think
to see some like warm days before it hit the cold, like end of October and November, and I heard from many of my friends that this year is pretty extraordinary because it's comparable, very warm, and it not like this usually.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a good way to kick it off. I've been to Toronto many times. Fortunately, mostly in the summer. I do remember. I think the coldest I've ever been was walking down Queen Street one day in the middle of winter, and I don't think I was quite dressed for it. So it was experienced some cold there. And I don't know what the weather's like in Armenia, but I'm assuming you have a little bit of cold weather there.
Yeah, we do have cold weather, but it's not as cold as it here. And also we don't have that much wind as we do here in Toronto. So for instance, if you see the weather is, let's say like -5, it feels like -5. Here you can have like 0 and it feels like -20, I don't know, depending on the weather, the wind. So it's very different.
The wind and and the dampness and that. So I've experienced it. So, before we jump into you moving to Toronto and sort of how you've got this set up now, I just wanted to kind of go back to how you got started in business. Was this was sort of design or branding? Was that sort of your first venture, or how did you get started?
I started my career very early, probably when I was like 14 or 15 years old, and I was basically doing a freelance job. And eventually I started working for advertising agencies, for publishing companies. And after that, when I already had built my portfolio, I had some kind of reputation as a designer, I thought of starting my own company. And starting a company was not very serious, as at first it was my like part-time job. I had the main thing that I was doing, and at weekends I was doing my company stuff, and it was basically me and my friends, and we didn't have people to work for us, so it was just us. We didn't even have an office, so whenever we would have meetings, it was usually in cafes or in lobbies, and it was kind of embarrassing thing. It is not actually, but at that time we thought that it's embarrassing to not have a proper office. So so we started, and at first it was really tough to get our first clients, and we didn't have any projects. So we thought that instead of waiting for good opportunities and good clients, we should think of projects that we would like to do and just do it without having the right client. So, and we thought of the projects that will somehow resonate with people. So, and they were very ambitious, and it is not something that you will get as a project from a major company or like a major institution. So there was a gap in some design systems that we have in our city, especially in transportation. So we thought of redesigning the public transportation navigation. And we didn't get the project. We just thought of it and started to doing it. And after that, we just posted on our social media. People liked it, and somehow it got to the government. They saw it, they liked it, and basically this is how we got started. The second thing was even more ambitious. We thought of that we want to redesign our national flag, and we did that. We proposed a very detailed case study of why it should be changed, and it didn't change eventually, but it got a lot of media coverage. A lot of people talked about that, and actually a lot of people starting to know our company and started to be interested in our company, and then we to get more real projects after that.
Yeah, and that's it's funny because like this is over in Armenia. What year was this about?
We started 13 years ago, 2011 actually.
13 years ago. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Because it's interesting because it feels very familiar. Like I before Dryrun, because I have a software company now, but before Dryrun, I had a creative agency for over a decade, and so I started that I think in around '99. So like a full over a decade before you. Very familiar. It was myself, and I had only a laptop. I didn't have an office, but I didn't want people to know that. I did all the work on the laptop, but I had it because then I could show up to a client and it would look like I was really dialed in. Nice laptop, show my portfolio. Getting that first job, same thing. It was, finding that first customer and fortunately I could do something really interesting with it, a really interesting kind of poster brochure thing that was beautiful for a industrial design company. But I did these little projects as well just to show what I could do, prove myself. And it feels very, very familiar, even though it was, like a decade apart and across the world. But I think a lot of designers and creatives, that's sort of how you get started. How do you get that exposure and get people to trust you, right? So I really credit you with going with something as ambitious and interesting as sort of a transportation signage project, because that's not just superficial. There's underlying mechanics that make that really effective. It's not just it has to look good; it has to communicate really well.
So actually, our first interaction with Canada was. I think it was 2018, and there's a thing in governments when like head of governments meet each other, they exchange with expensive gifts, and there was a story in Armenia when people were discussing how ridiculously expensive are those gifts, and they are sometimes very not very tasteful. So people didn't like it because they are bought with the money of taxpayers. That's why they didn't like how it goes. And we thought of going on a creative direction and creating something that is not very usual and will somehow stand out. So at that time, Justin Trudeau was visiting Armenia, and we did a research, and we found that he's a big fan of these flashy socks and like with these creative and sometimes bizarre designs. And we thought of creating something especially for him. So we did the design of socks with the theme of colors of Armenian flag, and we built a beautiful packaging for that with like a big huge packaging for only socks, and we even had a small part with Armenian brandy, and it was eventually gifted to him. And a lot of media wrote about that. There were a lot of stories about how Armenian Prime Minister presents these socks to Justin Trudeau, and it was fun. They wore it together, and it was like a fun, positive thing. And that was also a huge thing, and we didn't get a project for that. We just thought of it, and like we somehow managed to do that.
Yeah, well, it's honestly, it seems quite brilliant to me, because it's hard to get exposure and rise above the crowd when there's so many people doing so many things, and it's kind of ingenious that you found a way to get that sort of exposure. But what I think is really important is that it's you didn't sort of set out just to get exposure. It was authentic. You were kind of solving a problem. And same thing with your transportation. You're solving a problem with the transportation system that you saw. That I think is really a good guidepost for businesses trying to say, okay, how do we gain some exposure? It has to be authentic. It has to have some value to it. And I think you kind of hit the nail on the head both times. And that's a lot of credit to you for doing that. It makes me think, like, okay, how do we do that for Dryrun? It starts getting you thinking, right?
I think the problem is that a lot of people don't think very big. They think that it's not manageable to go to like big goals and like have this kind of projects because there are many steps of approvals, and like it's hard to get to the top management to pitch this kind of ideas. But when you just do it and just post it, and people do the rest of the job, because if it gets a lot of attention, it somehow will get to the top. So,
and I know in my back in my agency days, we had for a time we had about 70% of our customer base were government agencies, and so I got used to kind of navigating through the department level and up to the different ministers and all of that, and it was just it can be a challenge. It can be a challenge, but there is a way. You're just having conversations and talking with people and moving your way through. So, but I always found in government there was the good and bad. Like it could be a real challenge, but it was also we were always pretty sure we're going to get paid, and it's gonna it'll generally run fairly smoothly. So. And we did manage to do some kind of fun things with it, even though, sometimes it might seem like government isn't the most interesting place, but we had some really interesting projects on the training and communication side.
I think that thing is very different in Canada, because like here you see a lot of how the government and like even the provinces position themselves. You see a lot of communication from that side. Yeah, you see like even like transport, like TTC in Toronto, and you see like district school board and how they position themselves, how they communicate with the general audience, and it's very different. And I see a lot of people complaining how they work, but the thing is that they do work. It's sometimes it's not very good, sometimes it's great, but they do work, and it's very different from a lot of parts of the world where you have this like fancy titles, fancy organizations, but they usually don't do a lot of things.
Yeah. That's I guess we are kind of spoiled a little bit here at times, and I'm down in the U.S. right now, but we're based in Canada. I spend the summers up in Canada, so. So looking at I was looking at your website, and I was looking at your LinkedIn profile, and I found it really interesting that you had recently did so you focus on branding now. Is that correct? Like much more on the branding side? Okay. What sort of guided you into that niche, I suppose, or that area?
I think it was kind of natural, because we tried a lot of things. At some point we were doing like digital marketing, at some point we were doing like general design, but after like spending a few years in the industry, we understood that that's the thing that we do the best, and people value what we do. And like you have this general rule when your like 20% of your services bring you the 80% of your income. So that was the case for our company.
Yeah.
So we thought instead of like taking many chances in different services, we should focus on one thing and try to do it as best as we can.
Yeah, and I think that's a really like a smart way to go. And I see a lot of agency owners, and even myself, like we were guilty of that. We were good at digital, like more on the software side and interactives and kiosks and things like that. But we would dabble in, some branding and dabble in some marketing and all of these other things, and realize that was a bit of folly. That if we, the more we focus on what we're best at, and get that exposure from that, the better off we are. And I know a lot of creatives, a lot of agencies struggle with that. It's they kind of try and do everything rather than focusing on one thing. And I think the challenge of doing that is generally down to just keeping the dollars coming in the door. Like, that's the biggest challenge. How did you guys sort of manage to do that transition and start to just, what did you do that you started to be able to make that conscious decision, but actually execute on that?
Actually, the thing was that we started as a branding agency. Then usually during the project, the client says, oh, great, I like the branding, everything that you did, but what about the website? Do you do the website, or can you like manage our social media? And if the client already is there and you don't have to do something to get a new client, it's like a temptation is very high to say, yes, we'll do it. Mm-hmm. And that's actually what we did.
Yeah.
And at first, when you don't have that much confidence in your ability to work and your like future of the company, because like you have people you have to pay their salary and you have to pay the rent, and sometimes it's like really hard to say no to something when it's already there. But there was a case when we had our focus on branding and design, what we did good, but we would sometimes get negative feedbacks from like the website development part or like social media. And it was like in the scope of the whole project it was a small thing, but when you have this small negative feedbacks, it affects the whole project. So we didn't like that, and we thought that our reputation, our history, and our like future plans and our strategy is more important than going after each dollar. But the thing is that even in a specific niche, there are a lot of opportunities to expand. So right now there's like huge technologies coming with the AI and like a lot of new stuff that's going on in the world. I think it's more reasonable to focus on a specific niche and try to improve in that, try to find new ways to deliver the product and to have like a better quality product, because nowadays like it starts to it's much easier to do what we do when like compared to like 10 or 20 years ago, because like right now you have all these technologies, like you have tons of generators of logos, like even brand guidelines, and people seek for quality work. And you will not go to a sushi bar and expect to have a good steak there, or like a wonderful dessert or tiramisu there. You go for a sushi bar and you expect the quality sushi. That's the thing that we try to do.
Yeah, and that's so you build that reputation, and that's, I guess it starts to feed on itself. Once you have the reputation, the portfolio, people know exactly what you are. That's what you do. one of the things that we've been talking with quite a few agencies about lately, and it's one of the things that it eventually sort of led to Dryrun, is this. In creative agencies, when you're project based and you're sending out invoice and everything, you get a lot of sort of peaks and valleys, or kind of feast and famine. Do you guys experience a lot of that, or how do you work sort of around that to kind of smooth things out and make sure you've just got regular money coming in and regular jobs coming in?
It's really tough in case of branding projects, because they are usually for 2, 3, or for big projects for 6 months. So you need these clients coming all the time. So for that, you need to focus on like getting clients all the time. We were thinking about like providing other services, for example, like design support or something like that, that could be more sustainable and could last a little bit longer, so you don't need to worry. So, we experimenting somehow with that, but we are not quite there yet. So for this, we just work on getting more and more clients. Usually, we don't have a very big team, but for that quantity of people, we get like more than 120 projects per year. It's actually a lot, and you need to deliver them, and that's probably the biggest challenge that we are facing day to day.
Yeah, that's a lot of what we used to experience too. Is we would we and I don't know, maybe you're more consistent than us, but we would be selling, and then we would get all of this work would come in, and then it was all hands on deck, and we'd all be in there doing work, and then you kind of forget, and you're not selling as much, and then the jobs are done, and then you get a slow period, and then you're selling rapidly to try and catch up, and then you get a bunch coming in, and those peaks and valleys were always a challenge. And it wasn't just a challenge, it was a challenge in the dollars coming in and the jobs coming in, but also wanted to keep the staff engaged. If we had a slow month, it's like, well, you got to keep them interested and working and productive. And it's hard when they're not doing billable hours, but you still got to, and that was always a challenge that that we were always trying to overcome, right? And eventually that is a little bit of what sort of led me to start a Dryrun, to try and figure out how do you project into the future and fill some of that in and figure that out. But it's it seems to be a chronic challenge. Yeah,
especially
all the time.
Like
something I know.
Especially like
go ahead.
You have something like pandemic when people are scared, like. At the beginning of pandemic, like people were very cautious. They were not starting new businesses. They were not spending their money on like branding and design. And we were finalizing our ongoing projects, but we were not getting new ones. So it was very like a period for us, like as a business owners, because like we knew that money is going to add at some point, and we are not getting new clients, we're not getting new projects, and but we were lucky that this period didn't last very long, so we started to get like small projects after that, and we somehow gone through that. But it's very stressful.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I know it really well. Like we, Dryrun, I credit a lot of it to around 2008, 2009 when I had my agency, and a recession hit back then. It's not similar to now, to be honest. It feels similar, and that's sort of what we did. Is like I didn't want to lay anybody off. Yeah. Jobs, like budgets were slamming shut, and you're like, okay, well, where are we going to get this money from? But you want to kind of keep everybody. And it got to be very stressful, and it was very much, I learned a lot. Like I learned a lot from that. We managed to get back on track really quite quickly. And it sounds like you've got back on track as well, which is great. it's hard though, and there's just it's just grinding through and finding those jobs and getting them in the door and knowing, like for us it was I had spreadsheets out, because you're like, okay, what's our cash flow look like, what's our sales pipeline look like, what's this look like, what's that look like, and you start pulling on that string and start to get a lot more information, but that information helped us understand what we had to do and where we had to go. And so it was a challenging time, and I can feel that now that businesses are going through a similar thing. We are to some degree too, but a very different sort of sector. And what do you feel is like, how do you feel things are sort of bouncing back in 23? What do you expect this year?
I think the AI is going to be a very game-changing thing this year, because it is growing so rapidly, and most of people don't follow up how it will develop. It is very similar, I think, to when like internet started to work at mid 90s, and but at that time, for a lot of people, they didn't have they didn't know how to use it, and mostly they were using for fun, like listening to songs or like reading articles. And the same thing is right now, because I see how people use these technologies. A lot of them, they just like messing around with it, just like trying ChatGPT to like create lyrics with like Eminem, and with stupid idea. But a lot of people are focusing on that, and it's like a game-changing thing, I think. It is going to take over a lot of industries. It's going to be used by a lot of industries, and if you don't catch this wave, I think in like a year or two, it will be late. Something similar to these big websites when they appeared, like Amazon or eBay at 90s, and they took the market. Yeah. The same thing is happening right now.
Yeah. And the way that I look at, like, over the last few years, there's been probably the last 5 years, maybe, we've seen a lot of AI startups, and it reminds me of the kind of early 2000s when we were doing some website work, and we would have to build in an e-commerce component, and the e-commerce component would be like $30,000 or $40,000, and we'd be contracting people to build stuff out, and now it's like $20 a month on Shopify. Like, and you can do 1,000 times more. And that's what it feels like. That I agree with you. I think the AI is coming to that point where it's going to be accessible for everyone, and it's going to, free or super low cost. And it's just figuring out, well, how do you connect it and embrace it and make use of it? It's not going to replace everything, but it can do a lot, and it can help a lot. It'll be really interesting to see how the next couple of years lays out. And same, we're always watching this, going, okay, how do we help our customers with this? How can we make use of this? It is a big game changer. That's as fundamental. I agree with you as basically the first browser and the first websites that popped up.
So right now we're trying to implement a lot of AI generative tools that exist right now. So for instance, like we almost replaced our copywriting for our website, almost like 80% with ChatGPT. So we try to advance in writing proper prompts and giving a right direction, but results that we see, it's mostly like at 90% it's better than the human written text. Also we use image generative tools like Midjourney for idea testing. We don't sell them as a final design or as a in the scope of the project, but we use them for testing ideas, for quickly trying how this idea will work. We don't spend like hours and days and pay the illustrator to do the work for the project. If we can just do it like this and have the result in like 5 seconds. Right now we even
Yeah, and that's
Right now we
yeah.
even designed
Go ahead.
a big guidebook for writing the prompts. This is for our like inside our company usage, but I think when we are finalized with that, we will publish it as well, so people can use it too, to create more like specific and more detailed images. And because right now it's very chaotic, people don't have that much control over the final result. But with this advancement in this prompt engineering, I think in like few months we will have the specific results what we want to have as a final result.
Yeah, it's and like as a tool, it's absolutely terrific. I still really believe that the people are so need to be there to understand, the outcome, like the communication, what needs, the needs of the client and how to address that. But it's just as a tool to be able to basically take away some of the grunt work, rapidly build things, rapidly mock things up. I think it's outstanding for that, and it's going to be it'll be interesting to see how it rolls out over the next few years, how it's embraced, and where it can help and where I'm sure where it can hinder too. Right.
I think people were mostly expecting that these technologies will firstly take the jobs for the people who were doing physical jobs, but it turned out the opposite. It takes the job from the intellectual positions, from intellectual jobs, and the thing that the physical jobs are still there, and I think for a long time they are not going to be replaced somehow with technologies.
Yeah, it's harder to build a robot than just the little brain of the robot. Yeah. So it's very true. So you started in Armenia. Now I'm curious now how you have sort of moved over to Toronto, and how that all sort of played out, and also how are you managing a business that is sort of across the ocean?
It's quite hard sometimes because it's a 9-hour difference. So I wake up very early to be able to connect with my team. So usually my working day starts at 6 till 9 o'clock. I'm having these calls with my team and giving feedbacks on the projects, and the rest of the day I focus on projects that are here, calls with Canadian clients. But the thing is, what motivated me is a few years ago, actually, I was reading a book, actually a biography of the founder of Sony, Akio Morita, and there was a part when he was telling that they were very successful at 60s in Japan. They were like the biggest company there, but they had ambition to conquer the world, and in order to do that, they needed to come to North America, to US, to Canada, but they didn't understand how the culture worked there, how people were using the products. So he moved with his family to US and started to just live there. With his family, living the regular routine there, and after that they starting to going to the U.S. market, and as we know, they were very successful. And the same thing is for me. Actually, it's a very hard decision to leave your comfort zone, leave your successful business, and move somewhere else where nobody knows you, like you don't know nobody, and it's really hard to start from scratch. But I think nowadays it's more easy to move around the world, and I don't want to settle down too early. And I think we all need to be very flexible, and if we don't challenge ourselves, we will not get to the next level. So it's very hard, it's very challenging, but I think it will be rewarding eventually.
Yeah, well, I can't imagine like an experience like that would be unbelievable, and uh, you learn so much from it and grow so much from things like challenges like that, and but then it also gives you
Sure.
opportunity, right? Like there's a whole other market you can access. So you've sort of you came to Toronto. You said just in the last
Yeah.
couple months. How is it? What are some of the things that you're like? How are you overcoming, and how are you? Because I've never done sort of that where it's like, okay, I'm land, here we go. Now we're going to go out and get some jobs. How are you approaching that?
It's very different because, especially in Toronto, where you have this diversity of cultures, where you have this so many people from different backgrounds, and like depending on the neighborhood is very different. So, for instance, I live in a part of Toronto where the majority of population is predominantly from East Asia, and you don't feel like in North America. You feel yourself like I don't know, in Seoul or in Tokyo, and it's actually very exciting to see this much diversity here. You drive like 10
Yeah.
minutes and you are in Italy. You drive another 10 minutes, you are in India. And even what is fascinating, that even like in supermarkets, the products that you have in the specific neighborhood is very different, even in the same chain.
Hmm.
Uh, so
Yeah.
so I think the main difference here is that when you do the design, when you do the branding, you have to adjust to the specific cultural group because they are very different. And as I see it, the
Hmm.
brands here do exactly that. For instance, like there's a TD Bank next door to my place, and like all advertising, all banners there are like in Korean. Like
Hmm.
if you go to downtown, it's a little bit different. So it's something new for me, and you have to adjust to that kind of
Hmm.
changes. But it's also a huge experience. It's very exciting to be part of that like mixture, and uh, eventually, I think I will get a lot of experience from that.
Yeah, yeah. And I was before we popped on, I was looking at your LinkedIn profile, and I saw you had actually redesigned as a project like a number of bank logos from Canada, and being Canadian, of course, growing up, they're so second nature and so familiar to me, and it was really nice to see them look fresh and look new and look exciting. And I think the banks could learn a lot from you. So hopefully some of them reach out to you because they're beautiful. It was absolutely beautiful work too.
Thanks. The motivation for redesigning that, I noticed that like banks here are too traditional. They are like, I understand that most of them have a huge history of like 100 or more years, but with all this like technologies coming, all the fintech that is coming, I think they are a little bit behind what's going on in the world, in Europe. And I thought that
Hmm.
in some way I could try to give a fresh touch to their logos, nothing radical, nothing very dramatic, but somehow they could be more refreshed. And for instance, the logo of CIBC is very familiar to around the world, and it looks like a logo for Renault, the car. Uh,
Hmm.
so I think that's the thing that can be changed, and I know that they did the change very recently, but I don't know. Even the branches, when you go to the physical branch, they look a little bit old, very traditional. They don't renovate them for a long time, as I understood. But
Yeah. Yeah, it's And you know, I've been banking, like I bank remotely almost all the time, and we have a new corporate bank, and I had had to drop something off last fall, and walked in, it was completely different. It was completely different from any bank I'd been in, and they had like little sort of pods and little almost rooms on the side, and I was kind of shocked because the banks here for decades and decades hadn't changed at all. You walk in, there's a lineup, there's a big, this is completely different. And but what was interesting is you don't get that impression at all. And from seeing the branding changes that you made, you get that impression. You look at it's amazing how it would almost prompt me to go, oh, I wonder how they've changed. You know, I wonder how this bank or that bank has changed. It almost prompts you to go and look, because it's fresh. You expect the bank to be fresh. And here was almost the opposite. It's like this one bank actually made it much different inside, but you'd have no idea. You just basically have to stumble across it. And I think there's an opportunity there. It's a competitive area, and it's like nobody wants to blink first, I think.
Yeah, and for like startups, I understand that it's much easier to do this kind of changes because they don't have the scale, they don't have like thousands of branches, thousands of ATMs, and I understand that all these kind of changes cost like millions of dollars. But for startup or a digital product, it's like this: you change your UI just like in a second, and you have a rebranded company. So, but I think the small companies take advantage of that, and that's why they are always up to date. They are always modern, and these big, huge companies, for them, it's really tough these days. That's why they try to catch up with this new things. They try to catch up with these new trends, but sometimes it's very hard for them. That's why I think people don't especially like younger generation, don't resonate with these old companies.
I agree, and it's fintech, of course, is changing that world so fast, and I think the banks are one that are a little slow to adapt, and but they're going to have to adapt pretty rapidly. They're going to be forced to, and there'll be a leader or two, I think, that'll lead the way, and everyone else will be chasing. But I know we're coming up actually on our time here. I've really enjoyed the conversation, learning about you. And like I said, I've seen your work. I was over on your website. I've designer by trade, designer by heart, I suppose. Got a couple of degrees in it. So anytime I get to talk with a designer, and I love looking at what you guys are working on, it reminds me back of my agency days to a little bit. And your work is beautiful. You guys do absolutely unbelievable work. So anyone listening to your show, how can they find you if they're looking for to freshen up their brand?
So for the international market, our website is brain.ca. So it's brain and brand, brain.ca. And for the Armenian markets, it's the same thing, brain.am. So projects are a little bit different, so they are for the specific market, but both of them have like most of our works, and we'll be very happy to cooperate with new clients from Canada, and to bring our experience and our knowledge to this market.
Yeah, that's terrific. Well, thank you so much, Edward. I really enjoyed chatting with you. Thanks so much for joining me on the show today. And I just want to mention before we call it a day, of course, again, I'm CEO and co-founder at Dryrun, financial modeling and cash management software. We can help, like even we were talking earlier, deal with some of the peaks and valleys in the sales pipeline and your cash flow. A really easy way to manage that sort of problem. So if you're looking for something like that, please come and check us out at dryrun.com. Thanks everyone for joining us, and until next time.